welcome to my channel. My name is Francisca, and in today's video I'll be showing you how to pad your 6 pieces bustier, and I'll also show you how to make the flare parts to stand out a little bit. There are different types of interfacings or wadding that you can use in this process, but I'll be showing you what I used for mine. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Please click the subscribe button, click the bell so you get updated whenever I post new videos. And now let's get right into the tutorial. I'll be making use of paper stay, I'll be making use of paper wadding, and I'll also be making use of this soft wadding, the medium thick one. This is the lighter one, and this is the very thick one. So I won't be using these ones. These are the 3 types of fusible interfacing wadding that I'll be making use of in this tutorial. This paper wadding is usually what I use to make my peplum to sort of like stand out a bit. If you've watched my 1440 degree peplum that I did, I used this paper wadding and it actually stood out really well. So for the back piece of my main fabric, I used paper stay on it from the beginning, that's from the top all the way to about 1/2 inch below my waist. So can you see, that's what I have for the side pieces, and then this is the center back piece. So from the top to about 1/2 inch or 1 inch below my waist. I'm going to be adding paper wadding from my waist area all the way down to the flare parts. That's what I'm going to do for this. So I just wanted to show you guys how I did this part. This is the back piece of the main fabric. So guys, for the front piece now, this is what I have. I went ahead and fused paper stay from the top. I'm talking about the side pieces now. From the top to about 1/2 inch below my armhole. I didn't want to do it all the way because we're still going to add wadding to the bust area, but for the back we're not doing anything like that. So I just did it from the top here to this point because we're going to cut the neckline, and I want the top of the neckline to sort of like be a little bit stiff. So that is why I did it like this, from the top to about 1/2 inch below the armhole area, as you can see. So can you see that? Then for the center piece, I just went with about 4 inches below because I'm going to be cutting my neckline more than this 4 inches. Remember I said that I wanted the neck to sort of like be thick a bit. I didn't want it to be too light, so that's why I did this bit. And this part is going to be fused with wadding, so that's why I did not bother to extend it all the way down. What I did for this first side piece is the same thing I did for this piece as well. The second side piece for the front, from the top to about 1/2 inch. You can go with 1 inch after your armhole curve. Do you understand? So I'm going to keep this aside now and get our lining fabric. We're still going to come back to this, so I just want to explain them bit by bit to you. So guys, for my lining fabric, both the front and the back pieces, everything was fused right from the top to the bottom with paper stay. So I fused every single bit with paper stay. Alternatively, you can use air stay for this. Air stay will give your lining more thickness, so you can go with air stay if that is what you prefer. Paper stay will also thicken up your lining a bit, but it won't thicken it as much as air stay will thicken it. So now that I'm done talking about my lining fabric, I'm going to move back to my front piece for the main fabric. So guys, we are back to the front bodice for the main fabric. So I'm going to be showing you what I'll be doing to pad the bust area of this. So I'll just go ahead and turn it like this so you guys can see what I'm doing very clearly. This is what I'll be using to pad it, like I mentioned earlier, and this is the medium textured wadding. I think that's what I'm going to call it. I cut this in such a way that this straight part right here is going to be resting right at my under bust. So I'll just go on to arrange this. So if you want to do yours, you can cut your wadding to be about 2.5 inches away from the raw edge of your fabric, after you have placed them together like this. Ensure that they are very, very close together, and then go on to, cut your wadding to be 2.5 inches away from this edge here. This is so that it doesn't, make sewing your side seam, more cumbersome, because if you leave it to the end, this area is going to be very, very thick, and you actually, do not want that. So what I'm going to do now is just align it like so, and then I'm going to trim off any parts that needs trimming. So if this place is shorter than 2.5 inches, I'll go on to, remeasure and then cut it out. Do the same thing for this side as well. As you can see here, is actually, looking longer. So guys, I've gone ahead to, trim off the parts that I don't need, and this is what I have. Now what I'm going to do is now take this to my pressing area and press this wadding down to my fabric really, really well. I wanted to mention that this part of the wadding is about 7 inches away from the edge of my fabric. This is going to be like my shoulder line. So I measured 7 inches from that point, and then this remaining part from here to here is from that 7 inches to my under bust. Do you understand? So I'll just go on right now and press this down. After pressing, this is what I have. So what I'm going to do now is to go on to trim this out, trim this out. I've trimmed it out. This is what I have right here. I've also gone ahead to, attach my paper wadding to, the flare parts, that's for the sides. I've done it here for this part, and I've also done it for the other side, as you can see. I'll just be explaining how I cut it. So I cut the paper wadding to, the size of the flare at the bottom, and I made sure that it's covered this soft wadding that I placed right here at the bustier. You may be wondering, why up to like 3 types of interfacing for just this 6 pieces bustier? It is what you want that will determine, what you're going to add to your fabric. Do you understand? I might as well have gone with, this soft wadding all the way down, but I wanted this to stand out a bit, and paper wadding has more stiffness to it. Let me put it that way. It has more stiffness compared to this one that is kind of like soft and flexible. Paper wadding is like, it will give you that, maybe should I call it cardboard effect or so. So it's really going to stand out nice. So that's why I went with a paper wadding for the bottom part of this 6 pieces bustier. That's for the flare part, and I cut it in such a way that it overlapped onto this soft wadding. I don't want it to start from here. That's from where this soft wadding stopped. So can you see? I didn't want it to start from there. I wanted it to overlap so that I will not have this part sort of like, would I call it folding or dividing because of this cut here. So that's why I cut it in such a way that it overlapped. So it will just be what I would call seamless. Let me put it that way. So I've pressed this part down. So I'll just take this to my pressing area and go on to, fuse this paper wadding to my fabric. I hope you understood my explanation. So guys, I fused it, and this is what I have. So I'm going to go on to move to the back. The way I did the back is just a little bit different. So what I did was I just placed my paper wadding just a little bit above my waist. This one is already fused. I just cut it to, 1/2 inch above my waist before the slant, and this is what I have. I've gone ahead to fuse the other pieces, which I did exactly the same thing. This is what I have right here. So I'll just go on to fuse this last piece, and then we'll go on to start stitching our pieces together. After all my fabric are fused with my interfacing, wadding, paper wadding, and soft wadding, at the flare area, I went up by 1 inch from the bottom and came in by 3 inches, and I used that to create this slanted edge that you can see here. I mentioned that in my previous video where I did the 6 pieces bustier pattern, that you need to do this so that by the time you sew up the flare edges, the curves are going to, they are going to curve into each other. So can you see that it is, smooth? If you do not do this, the edges are going to be kind of like, pointed. Do you understand? So go on to curve those edges, go up by 1 inch, come in by 3 inches, and then connect it and cut this out. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to sew my pieces up. And by the way, whatever I did for my main fabric, this you know, carving out at the edges, I did the same thing for my lining fabric as well. So what I'm going to do now is grab the pieces together, front and back. So I'm going to be sewing them up by a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the dart area that was cut. Do you understand? So I'm going to grab this now. We're going to be sewing by 1/2 inch from top to bottom, from top all the way down to the bottom. Sew by 1/2 inch. Do the same thing for this side as well. Sew from top to bottom or from bottom to top by a 1/2 inch. And then I'll do the same thing for the back piece. The back piece is divided into two. So what I'll be doing is sewing one side and the zipper allowance area by 1/2 inch. This part is supposed to be sewn together. Right here is my zipper allowance. So I'll come right here, place it on top like this, sew by 1/2 inch. Do the same thing for the other piece. Place it right sides touching and go on to, you know, sew by 1/2 inch from the bottom all the way to the top. Do you understand? And whatever I do for this main fabric piece, I'll repeat the same thing for the corresponding lining pieces. Sewn the pieces up together, and this is what it looks like. This is what I have. You can see that this part is kind of like a little bit stiff. So I've sewn the back pieces together. Here is my front piece right here, and you will see that the bust area is actually, you know, coming out well. You can see that is sinking inside like this. So can you see that? So this is what it looks on the outside. So I've also sewn the lining pieces as well, and this is what I have. Everything is sewn up together. Now that we have this done, what I'm going to do next is to go on to cut my neckline. Do you understand? And I'll be starting with the back first. So I've placed my back pieces on top of each other, ensuring that the seam, you know, matches really well. Very, very important. Everywhere needs to be aligned properly. What I'm going to do now is come right at the top here, mark 1 inch downwards. This is going to be for our shoulder slope. Do you understand? Now what we want to do is to create how much we want for our shoulder. The rest will be our neckline, and we are doing that from the armhole area. Right here is my zipper allowance area. Do you understand? We need to take note of the fact that we have 1/2 inch for seam allowance at the armhole area. Very, very important. So you have to mark that 1/2 inch so you don't make any mistake moving forward. Now from this 1/2 inch here, I'm going to be determining how much I want my shoulder to be. And whatever you are marking, even though you are adding seam allowance to it, make sure it is before this seam line that you have right here. Do you understand? So what I'm going to do now is to come right here. From this point here, I'll be marking 3 inches for my shoulder or my shoulder slope, and then 1/2 inch for seam allowance. So I marked the 3.5 right here, and then I'll connect that 3.5 inch mark to the 1 inch that I marked right here for my shoulder slope to create my shoulder slopes. So once I'm done with this now, I'm going to come right to the back area and then mark my neckline. And I'll be going with a neckline of 5 inches. So I'll add 1/2 inch at the top here for seam allowance. And then I'll be connecting this mark right here to where we, you know, marked for our shoulder slope. So I'll be cutting it following this mark that I've made up to this point, and then cut my shoulder slope. After cutting, this is what I have. What I'm going to do now is use this back piece that I've cut out for the main fabric. I'll be using this as pattern to cut out the lining. Do you understand? I'm going to move over to the front piece. To cut the neckline for the front, what I'm going to do is to just fold it into two like this. So I'll just fold it like this and make sure that the armhole is aligned. Very, very important. So I'll just pin this down to hold it in place. So you actually do want to get your front as accurate as possible. after folding and pinning the front piece, this is what I have. Now, whatever you do for the back, just make sure that your shoulder seam matches what you have for the front. Very, very important. If it doesn't match, that becomes an issue. So I marked 3.5 inches from the 1/2 inch mark that I did for the back. So I'll just repeat the same thing. Do you understand? I'll come right to my armhole area. First of all, I'll just mark my 1 inch for shoulder slants. So I'll mark that right here. Then I'll come in and, just mark my 1/2 inch for my seam allowance, so we don't make any mistake. And then I'll come right here and mark 3.5 inches. So I'll mark 3.5 inches. And what I'm now going to do is to connect from that 1 inch to that 3.5 inch point. So please take notes. So I'll just connect it. Basically, I'm doing exactly what I did for the back. If you are confused about what I just said now, I'm doing exactly what I did for the back. So I'll come to the center front area, mark my neck depth of 6 inches, inclusive of seam allowance. And then what I'm going to do is to connect from the 3.5 inch mark that I did here. I'm just going to connect it like this to form my neckline, and then I'm going to cut this out and then cut off my shoulder slant. After cutting the front, this is what I have. So I'm also going to use this, as my pattern to cut out the neckline for my lining piece. Do you understand? So that is what I'm going to do now, and then we are going to move on to joining all the pieces up together. So guys, after cutting out my necklines on both my main fabric and my lining fabric, this is what I have. The next thing I'm going to do is to join the pieces up at their shoulder seams, and I'll be attaching the main fabric to main fabric first. So I'm going to come right here, attach this piece to this side, and then I'm going to sew by a 1/2 inch. Can you see what I'm doing? These are the shoulder seams for the main fabric. I have the lining fabric underneath here. I'm going to do the same thing to it as well. And I'm going to sew the shoulder seams for this other side, the front to the back, main fabric to main fabric with right sides touching. Do the same thing for the lining that I have here, right sides to right sides touching, and then I sew by 1/2 inch. I hope you understand that. After sewing my shoulder slants, this is what I have. I've sewn it for both my lining and my main fabric. The next thing I'm going to do is to go on to, sew my neckline for both the front and the back. And I'll make sure to top stitch the neckline so it can really, sit nicely on my body. After that, I'll be sewing the side seam by 1/2 inch, all side seams by 1/2 inch, and then I'll sew the bottom as well by 1/2 inch. I'll do the same thing for the back as well. Sew the side seam by 1/2 inch, the bottom by 1/2 inch, the zipper allowance area by 1/2 inch. Like I said, I'm going to make sure to top stitch the neckline. I'll also try and do a top stitch at the bottom as well so that it can, fold in really nicely, especially because this part is flare and curved. So I'll do a top stitch right at the bottom as well. Guys, I've sewn everywhere, my neckline, the side seam area that's on the wrong side by 1/2 inch. So this is what I have right at the bottom as well. I top stitched the bottom, I top stitched my neckline. The next thing I'm going to do is to turn everything right sides out, and I'll be using my armhole to do that. So I'll just go on to turn everything right sides out. I'll start from this part. Please make sure that you cut off excesses at the edges like this so it can, poke out really nicely. Do you understand? So go on to do that for yours. I also notched curved areas, especially around my neckline, before I went on to top stitch. Very, very important. So you can also do that at the bottom of your dress where, you have something like a curve going on there, even though you have top stitch though. So just go on to notch it. Like I said, I'll be turning it out through one of the armholes. So I'm starting with the back piece. So can you see what I'm doing? My hand is already inside the armhole. So I'm just going to bring this part out like this. Please make sure to poke out the edges. Very, very important, so that it can, look pointed. Even though you're going to be sewing that in, you want to, make it as neat as possible. So after bringing this out like this, don't worry, we're still going to press this down. So I'm going to come right here now, pull everything out through this armhole area, both the front and this other back piece. This second armhole right here, I'll pull the second back. So it's going right through the first armhole, and it's going to come out through the second armhole area. So I just pull it out like this. Then I straighten out the front piece. Then I'll pull the back piece, this last one. I'll pull it out through its own armhole on this side. And this is what I have, guys. So now we have everything on the right side. So the next thing I'm going to do, after bringing everything out like this, is to poke out the edges at the bottom, at the zipper area, and then I'll go on to, give this a very, very good press so that the bottom can, lay flat. Do you understand? So I'll just go on to do that now. So guys, after pressing, this is what I have. My fabric is now laying flat and, really, really nice. So can you see how neat it is looking? What I'm going to do next is to go on to close this armhole area before we go ahead and sew the side seam. Do you understand? You want to do that before, because if you sew your side seam first, you still have this raw edge going on here. So it is very, very easy. It is very, very simple. I hope you understood this tutorial to the end, which is actually what I'm aiming for, that you understand this. The next thing I'm going to do now, to close this armhole, you can't just go on to fold it in and sew. This is a very, very curved area. So what you want to do first is to go ahead and notch this a little bit. Do you understand? Notch it a little bit like this. This will enable you to fold it in very, very well as very, very neatly. So your notch is small, about 1/4 of an inch, because you're going to be folding this in by 1/2 an inch. Do you understand what I'm saying? So make sure that you notch it very, very little, which is what I am doing. So once the notches are done, the first thing you want to do is to fold where you have the seam at both the main fabric and the lining fabric. So we are going to fold by 1/2 an inch inwards, then fold the lining by 1/2 an inch inwards, and then we are going to pin this down. The reason why you're pinning this down at this area is so that you have everything aligned properly. So what I'm going to do next is to go on to fold these other places by 1/2 an inch inwards, fold the lining as well by 1/2 an inch inwards. After pinning the armhole area, this is what I have, and you can see that it is pinned very, very neatly on both sides. After doing this, what you want to do is to stitch very, very closely to the edge of the armhole area, and making sure that you are sewing on both the lining fabric and the main fabric. So when you're sewing, you actually need to watch what you are doing, so you don't skip any fabric that is going to be under. Do you understand? So what I've done here, I'll repeat the same thing on this other armhole, and then I'll go on to sew. Do you understand? I will notch, I will pin, and then I will sew. So guys, after sewing up my armhole, this is what I have. So can you see how neat this armhole looks? So you want to ensure that you sew as neatly as possible with the method I explained previously. If you are going to be attaching a sleeve to this outfit, you do not need to fold in the seam allowance and then stitch. All you need to do is leave it as it was or as it is, and then overlock the raw edges and attach you know, your sleeve to it. So after doing this, now what I'm going to do next is to go on to, you know, sew this by the side seam. So I'm going to sew it at the side seam area by the seam allowance. I gave my fabric a 1.5 inch seam allowance. I used 1/2 inch to, you know, sew the lining and the main fabric together before turning it, you know, right sides out. So what I'm going to do now is to now sew by the remaining 1 inch from the armhole area all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side as well. After sewing the side seam, this is what I have. Now you're not going to leave this part like this, because if you do, it is going to, you know, sort of like show on the outside. So can you see this part that I have here sticking out? What you want to do is to go on to, you know, fold in this edge, fold it in like this. Can you see? And then you will not notice it showing. So in order to hold this in place, just use your hand needle and thread to, you know, tack this place, and it will, you know, hold it in place. Do the same thing for this other side, and, you know, just go on to repeat the same thing for the other side seam. I'll be using an open and close zipper for this blouse. I want the blouse to, you know, to be able to open up totally, so I'll go on to attach an open and close zipper to this blouse. You can use any zipper of your choice. You can use a normal zipper that, you know, can stop right here. You will still be able to enter your blouse, whatever zipper you decide. So guys, we are all done with this tutorial when it comes to, you know, padding the bustier around the bust area and also at the bottom of the blouse where, you know, have the flare. So you can see that this part is not laying flat. You can see that it's kind of like sticking out. You're not going to get the same effect as you would get a full peplum. No, this is just to give it, you know, that standing out effect, if you get what I mean. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, turn on the bell so you get updates when I post new videos, and I'll be seeing you guys in my next tutorial. Bye.